IVM.
Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of the Musafir Stories, India's very own travel podcast, where each week we discuss the story of travelers in their own words and relive their experiences with you, our listeners. Hey guys, welcome to a brand new episode on the Musafir Stories. It's been a while, but hope you guys are all safe and the podcast has been keeping you good company and helping you get over this difficult period. Do leave us a review or give us a shout out on your podcast app. Talking about shout outs, we'd love to call out a few of our listeners who have taken time to write to us. A big thank you to Satvik Kupili, Samadip Saha, Bhishma Bhatti, Malika Bhagat, Gokul Suresh, Ila Reddy, Monica, Vatsal from Nomads of India, Malini Balakrishnan, Nikhil Chandra, Sai Aditya, Motormouth Podcast. Also, a big shout out to Kamna Revanur and the New Indian Express for featuring us on their 40 Under 40 socially responsible content creators. It is a huge honor for us to find a mention in this list of accomplished creators. Thank you to everyone who made this possible. Now, about today's episode. We talked to a traveler, a podcaster, and a storyteller. And yes, we're still talking about the same person. Let's hop onto this fun episode and find out more about fellow travel podcaster, Utsav Mamoria. With that introduction, I'd love to welcome Utsav Mamoria, the host of Postcards from Nowhere, a lovely travel podcast that's hosted on IVM. Utsav, thank you so much for being a part of the Musafir Stories and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Seth. It's a pleasure to be here.
Pleasure for me as well. And I had a chance to meet with Utsav recently and really glad that I could bring him on, kind of steal him and bring him on to the podcast for a little bit because Utsav is an ace traveler, especially slow travel and budget travel is what Utsav's specialty is. So hoping to learn a lot of those tips and tricks from there as well. So Utsav, I've given a short intro about you, but why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit more about you as well as your podcast, right? Postcards from Nowhere. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure. By the way, to all your listeners, the honor is completely mine because, one thing I'd like to say, and I'm a podcaster myself, is that I have immense respect for the Musafir Stories because they were doing this when no one was doing it in the travel space and they have been at it consistently. So for someone who's a content creator, a lot of respect for you guys for being able to do this so continuously. I'm absolutely thrilled to be on the show. Now, as far as Saif is being very kind, he's called me ace traveler and everything, but not really. Yes, of course, I focus on slow travel and I'll come to a little bit of why I love slow traveling. And of course, budget travel, because when I started traveling, I was way back in college, right? And of course, you didn't have money then. So budget travel was more of a necessity than a choice, whereas it's not the case so much now. So yes, I've been traveling for about 10 to 12 years now, and I've been to a fair number of places, both India and outside. But more than that, I think it's about the kind of places I pick, and I have a certain sort of logic I go with. Maybe not a great logic to go with, but it's still my logic, so I like it. The whole podcast, also the Postcards from Nowhere, started off somewhere because I did want to talk to people about a slightly different way of traveling and how it can be more meaningful. It doesn't have to be expensive. It sort of creates everlasting memories for you when you travel that way. So I think that was a real motivation for me to really start it. I think some of it also comes from my own background of being a behavioral researcher. So for a living, I understand human behavior and help companies and brands make decisions, right? And what I've understood is that understanding plus my interest in history, architecture, culture, put together with travel sort of gives me a slightly unique perspective on how people behave, how cultures are, and how different people live life so differently. And sort of that is what really attracts me to travel. And that's where the entire podcast and the entire desire to travel and find ways to travel cheaply really came about. So that's sort of the genesis of how I ended up where I am today.
Lovely. And yes, for the listeners, all of the links to Utsav's podcast, called Postcards from Nowhere will be in the show notes. And also we will link up a couple of great conversations that Utsav had as a guest on Simplified, right?
Yes.
Where he speaks a lot about traveling on a desi budget, if you might
Yes.
want to call it, right? So a great, actually, two-part conversation. So we'll link that as well in the show notes. But today, Utsav, we are eager to find out where you're taking us and our listeners to on the Musafir Stories.
Yeah, so I'm going to take you guys and let me see if how many of you can get it. You might end up reading the title of the episode, but you're still going to guess it. So the thing is that this is the state which is known to be pretty much 100% organic. Right, this is one state where pesticides and fertilizers and chemicals have not entered the food chain. Right, this is a state which a lot of people think is part of the Seven Sisters, but is actually not a part of the Seven Sisters. Right, and this is the place also which gives you some of the most stunning views of the Himalayas. So, of course, the place I'm talking about is Sikkim. And I've been to Sikkim twice, something as recently as just before COVID hit us. And I was very fortunate to have, just returned a week before everything went into lockdown. And I focused largely on North Sikkim. As I said, I'm a slow traveler, so I cannot run through places very quickly. I like to take my time at a place because my fundamental belief is that the world is too large to see, right? So it's not really humanly possible to see everything, but whatever you see, you must see it with an intensity or with such a pace that you're able to retain most of it even later, right? So you should be able to regale a friend with a conversation, or just sometimes on a lazy day, close your eyes and take you back to the places where you were sitting and enjoying your time. So I think that's the kind of travel I like, and that's why I picked up slow travel as well as North Sikkim, traveling slow.
Lovely. And some really cool points about Sikkim there as well, that it is the first officially an organic state in India, right? So that's a great point. And the other, really, I don't know, I never knew about this, but I don't know if you knew about this, was that Sikkim was an independent princely state up until the year 1975. And
I did not know this.
Okay. 1975 is when Sikkim became part of India. They had a referendum, and people of Sikkim chose to be a part of the Indian Union. So that was something really surprising to me as well. It was great to find out. And if you've been on top of the news, you probably have recently read about the controversy of I think it was in Delhi that there was a
Sikkim was not shown as a part of India.
Exactly.
It just happened, I think, today or yesterday, I think.
Yeah, so I was just wondering about maybe this template or whatever for the ad that was prepared. It was prepared before 1975. That's a joke, but that's what
true.
It goes back to. Sikkim. I guess there's a little bit of a misconception that lies. Also, some people end up thinking that it's not a state at all. It's a part of West Bengal, right? Just given the proximity. But strategically located also, right? Just above that chicken neck, like we say. Just separates the northeast to the rest of mainland India, just above that, and surrounded by Nepal, China, Tibet, however you want to call that, and Bhutan. So really, really cool. And it's great that we're actually exploring North Sikkim in this as a part of this episode, because North Sikkim is a little bit, compared to the rest of the state, right? Much less populated, as well as much more bigger and serene also, right? Rugged with the Eastern Himalayas, like you mentioned. So take us away and tell us about your itinerary. And I'm really eager, because a lot of the episodes, like I was mentioning even during our conversation, are a lot of the conversations on the podcast are usually pretty a quick 3-4 day itinerary that we try and share, but really looking forward to this one, because you and your style of taking it slow, taking it easy, and trying to absorb as much as possible, right? So really looking forward to that. Tell us a little bit more about this trip of yours and how you went about it.
Yeah, so I think one of the things is that if you're traveling to Sikkim, one thing you really need to be very clear on, that to visit some parts of North Sikkim, you need permits, right? Mm-hmm. So unlike most places where you can probably just land up and figure your way out, Sikkim is a little more tricky that way. So when you want to go to the northern parts of Sikkim, such as Guru Dongmar and even Chopta Valley, and Lachen for that matter, which becomes your base, and I'll come to that in a little while, you need to have your permits in place. So it might just be a good idea to, probably pre-plan everything a little bit and go from your home base. You could either use a travel agent who could help you with permits. You could use a travel agent to book the entire thing for you. And the advantage is that, because the way Sikkim is as a state, you will have to cross Gangtok at some point or the other, whether you're going to north or whether you're going to south, right? Because in the mountains, you won't have a lot of crisscrossing roads, right? There are largely one or two dedicated paths, and pretty much everyone moves on that. So it also gives you an advantage because you can actually sort of stick to one route and stop en route to one or two places as you go ahead. So it makes life easy. It also makes life difficult if you're traveling in maybe the winters and the roads get blocked, the passes get blocked. Things can get tricky there. But one thing I would suggest to anyone who's taking a trip to Sikkim, and this has been a bit of my a way of traveling also, is that please engage with locals who are in the travel and tourism business. Right. I know that a lot of people from different parts of the country, especially from West Bengal, given its proximity, run a lot of tours and operations in Sikkim. But I request you to please engage with local tours, local guides, because it's a difficult living to make in the mountains. If any of you who travel to the mountains would know that it's not easy, and the money is not flowing in 12 months of the year, right? It's very, very seasonal. I mean, they are the only people I think who live by the seasons. I don't think city dwellers really live by seasons anymore. So we actually sort of got in touch with someone. And by the way, I picked it up from one of my guidebooks. I have an India guidebook from Rough Guides. Okay. Not the biggest fan of Lonely Planet, so I use a couple of other ones. And that's where I picked it up. And because that sort of ensured me that the person was local, and everyone he was employing was from Sikkim itself. Now, that's something which is very critical for me. So even the places I stayed all along the route, I think barring one, were all owned by Sikkimese people. Yeah. So my itinerary was largely looking, of course, ending up at Gangtok, spending a couple of days in Gangtok. While, technically speaking, there is not much to see in Gangtok city itself, but in and around Gangtok, there is a fair bit to do, right? And I did skip it this time because this was my second trip to Sikkim and I was not very keen. But I did end up staying at one of the nicer places this time in Gangtok, which was run by a Sikkimese family for the last 20-30 years, right? And it gave us fabulous views of the Kanchenjunga. Like if you could get one of those rooms, you could really just get out of your room, sit on the balcony, have a nice cup of red tea, and just look at the Kanchenjunga early morning. And a few things are more uplifting and fulfilling looking at snow-clad mountain peaks. I mean, at least for me, I mean, right? I'm very, very biased towards mountains. So,
and what time of the year did you choose to? Because again, depending on when you choose to travel, the sites can be completely different, right?
Absolutely. So we chose to travel, sort of late Feb, early March. One of the things we were very conscious of, we know that from the 1st of March is when the tourist season really opens, right? And then there's a rush of people coming in. And we were very keen to avoid that kind of a rush because mountains is not one place I would like to be rushed at all, right? I mean, it's the kind of place where you want to go slow because essentially a rush of people means a lot more traffic. And because the roads aren't the widest roads and sometimes they're not great in places because they're roads on the mountains, then, it essentially means that you could be stuck at a place with very, very long waiting times. My recommendation to go to Sikkim is really to go to in shoulder seasons. And by the way, that's a recommendation for going anywhere, that you should take the shoulder seasons because traffic is less, people also have more time to talk to you and so on and so forth. And things are also marginally cheaper. So it helps. There's a downside to it. The downside is that not all places may be accessible because of weather.
Right. That's
sort of something which happened to us. So we were moving from Gangtok to our first stop, which was Lachen. Right. So there are largely two roads you can take in north of Sikkim. Right. So one is you to go to Lachen, go to Chopta Valley, and go to Gurudongmar Lake, and the other one is you go to Lachong and go further. Right. We chose to go the Lachen route because I was very keen on going to Gurudongmar, and this was back in 2012 or 13 when I tried to do a trip to Sikkim, and I went in August. Not the best choice on my part to go in August because it was raining and there was a landslide, and of course the roads were completely shut. So I missed going out to Gurudongmar. I had to then completely modify my itinerary to go to South Sikkim. So I then went to Pelling and Namchi and other places. But this time I was keen, so we ended up in Lachen. We started early in the morning from Gangtok, and we drove. So we had a driver, of course, and while you can in some parts of Sikkim drive by yourself, but I think once you get into the zones where you require permits, it's better that you have a local driver with you. Yep. One, because they've done the route so many times, they pretty much know everyone. Second, if there is a problem, roads are closed, their networks of informers are much, much stronger than you'd ever have, right? Because after a point, your phones are not going to work. And well, with this kind of information, phones are largely useless.
So yeah, it definitely helps if, especially if you're not doing like a bike trip. I've seen a few solo riders, right, do bike trips. Again, it's just that you are bypassing the hurdles of getting permits and all of that and not knowing the right people. And the last thing you want to do is mess up a trip because of things like this, right? Logistical things like permits and stuff like that. So it's always great if you tie up with a local tour company, right? Again, even more important, going back to your point that you made at the beginning, that you sign up with a local company there, given in the post-COVID era, right? If you can call it that, really helpful to kind of pump up the local economy there as well.
Yeah.
So cool. I think those are a couple of good points. But how long of a journey is this from Gangtok to Lachen?
So Gangtok to Lachen can take you anywhere between 5 to 8 hours, right? Depending on what kind of roads you get and kind of traffic you get. If you get traffic, it can be much, much longer, right? But that's the kind of time you need. So it's good that sort of you leave early morning, maybe like, if not early morning, at least by 7:38, have your breakfast and try and reach there by about 2 to 3 because in the mountains, and especially in the east, sun sets much earlier, right? So you ideally want to be in a safe place and not be driving too much into the night. We reached around that time, and the beauty of a place like Lachen is, I always think that the places in between we go to when we travel are some of the most beautiful places because they are the ones which are most ignored, right? So most people just think, okay, what's there to do in Lachen? I mean, it's just a stopping point to go to Guru Dongmar because that's the real thing and that's what everyone wants to go to. But we actually stayed 2 nights in Lachen. And what we actually got a glimpse of was we could actually walk the entire place. It's a small village, right? And we actually got into talking with locals, and they were telling us about seasons. They were telling us about crops, and they were telling us about, how some of the world's best cardamom is grown in Sikkim. And that's something which I did not know, right? And which eventually led me to a place called Zongu. I also ended up spending a lot more time at a monastery. And while I could not speak to some of the monks because they were praying, and of course, we wouldn't disturb a praying monk, but it was completely empty, right? So wherever I went in Lachen, almost there was no one else apart from us. So I went with my partner, my wife. There was no one apart from us. So that itself was a great feeling to have. The other thing which we also got to know is so much about even Chopta Valley and Guru Dongmar, where we were supposed to go, from the locals living there, right? Because they live there. So some of them actually moved to Lachen instead of living closer to Chopta Valley because in the winters, the place becomes almost inhabitable. The only people who survive there is the Indian Army, and hats off to them for, being able to survive in those conditions. So, a lot of challenges of living in the mountains also really come to the fore when you sort of stop at places and spend a little more time. While it's beautiful, I think it's a lot more romanticized than it should be. And so when you were staying in Lachen, the first day we tried to go to Chopta Valley, it was completely snowed out. We could not make it, right? And day 2, we somehow made it to Chopta Valley. And because we were on the off season, when we ended up Chopta Valley, there was just one more car along with us at that place. And to give you a perspective, our driver told us that just 1 week to 10 days from now, at this point, you will at least have 50 cars.
Yeah.
Right? Just to get that one single view. And we pretty much had that view for all by ourselves. So that turned out to be a great, great part of the trip. And of course, there we passed through the army camps, right? And we passed through one village around Chopta Valley. The name sort of slips my mind right now. That was completely shut because it was such heavy snow that no one could really live there. And as with all army camps high in the mountains, you find some very quirky stuff. Right. So there was one place where it was written this is the highest altitude in the world where you'll find a dosa. Right? So a lot of that kind of stuff. And of course, the Border Roads organizations, which is also known for a lot of its quirky messaging, like bro protects you and listen to bro. because they are everywhere to BRS. So of course, all the things were there, which always makes it a fun thing.
Yeah.
But I remember reaching the last part of, from Chopta Valley, we were supposed to go to Dongmar. We reached there, and our driver went up to the people in the army who check your permits.
Mm-hmm.
And they said that, we don't recommend you to go, but you're going at your own risk if you want to. And we're not going to come and help you out if you get stuck there.
Mm-hmm.
I spoke to my driver. I'm like, what should we do, right? And I think he made a very valid point. He's like, sir, I don't recommend it. And if the army doesn't recommend, I don't think it makes any sense to go.
Mm-hmm.
And which made a lot of sense, right? So, of course, I couldn't go to Guru Dongmar. So this was my second time wanting to go there. And I was very unlucky that I couldn't make it.
That means you have one more trip to Sikkim.
Absolutely. There's one off it, definitely. Like, this has become now a rallying cry for me that I need to get to Guru Dongmar.
Yeah, Sikkim just wants you to come back
absolutely.
again and again.
I'm very happy to go back. Yeah. And one of the most beautiful things I realized that when you were coming back, and we stopped at the same place where our permits were getting checked. Mm-hmm. And that guy said that it's a good thing you didn't go, but don't forget that if you actually went there, you got stuck, we will definitely come for you, right? And it's always good to know that the army has your back in places like this. Yeah. And you should always listen to them because they live there day in, day out. So they really know the challenges of being there. But what happened interestingly was that on our way back, when we were coming back to Lachen, we stopped at a Gurudwara. And that Gurudwara is, of course, sort of run by the Sikh community there. And of course, we had fantastic langar food, no doubt about it. That's not something we should miss. For me, it was sort of reaching Guru Dongmar simply because there was one container kept there which had water from Guru Dongmar, right? And I could actually drink that water. Now, to me, that felt really nice because I was like, all this while I was thinking, oh shit, I couldn't go to Guru Dongmar, this time as well. Yeah. But I reached there, I had some great food, very good conversation with the guy who runs the Gurudwara there. And, I could drink from there. And I actually understood the legend of Guru Dongmar, that why is it called Guru Dongmar? So the legend really goes is that there was actually the Sikh Gurus who were traveling all the way to Tibet, and they had to cross into China, and they reached Guru Dongmar. So, the people who were living there, and it's a really difficult place to live because, you really can't go there after 2 to 3 p.m. The winds get so fierce that it's not possible to stay. So they sort of spoke to him and requested him, saying that we have a lot of problem with water here, right? And can you help us out? So he used his stick, right, which is called dung in Punjabi, right? So, and that's how the name came, Guru Dangmar. So he sort of used his stick and water sprouted from that place, and that part of Sikkim became the lake. And it's still said that the place where he actually hit the stick is the place where the water still does not freeze, even no matter how low the temperature goes. So that entire whole story, the entire feeling and the peace I got from the Gurudwara was a really satisfying time for me. And even though I'm still going to go to Guru Dangmar one way or the other, I've not given up on that. Yeah. But that was a fantastic part of the trip. But
it's true, actually, to your point, right? Still considered very sacred also for both of the Sikhs and also the Hindus, because it's true to your part that there's a big Sikh legend about Guru Nanak actually visiting us, right? Along with his companion Mardana. But the other legend also is that Guru Padmasambhava, right? He was supposed to actually have passed through this, the famous Buddhist saint. And again, similar kind of a storyline that he was kind of approached by the locals there to help them out with even the water. And he actually placed his hand over a portion of the lake that kind of was frozen and then unfroze or whatever. They could actually drink water from there. So again, there's a little bit of a dispute, but either way, I think it's very similar. Both stories are very similar, and it's considered sacred both for the Hindus and the Sikhs. And even just by the altitude also, right? It's supposed to be one of the highest high altitude lakes at over 17,000 feet, I think, above sea level.
Yeah.
So that way also, I think it'll be a very unique experience when you go back there next time. I'm sure you'll enjoy that visit. And remains frozen most of the year, right? So that way, really, really harsh conditions. And hats off to the army, like you said. But how about your experience? Like after the Gurudwara, did you head back to Lachen after this?
Yeah, so we did head back to Lachen. We stayed for a night. But what we started doing after that is that we moved to a part of Sikkim called Zongu. Right now, Zongu is, there's a town called Mangan, which is on the road from Lachin to Gangtok, and that's really the starting point for you to get into Zongu. Now, Zongu, of course, is a far, far less visited area of Sikkim, even much lesser than Gurudangmar or Lachin. Right? Now, what really drew me towards Zongu in the first place was that it's one, difficult to access, and there is not really much to do. And I'm very pulled towards places there is not much to do, simply because then I'm not running and chasing down things that I want to cover. Right? So it has a couple of things to do for sure, yes. But the interesting part was that for my my tour provider as well, he also had never sent anyone to Zongu, right? And he was a little skeptical, saying that, are you sure you want to go? Because there is not really much. I mean, it's a village. I mean, it's a region which has a village, and there are some people who live there, but maybe there's a monastery, there's a waterfall, but that's about it. I'm like, yeah, sure, I want to go. Like, we drove, and there were times in that drive, because once you leave Mangan, the road is good for maybe a good half an hour, 40 minutes, but after that, the road can get slushy, muddy, and if you don't have the right kind of car, and I do not recommend you driving yourself there, I don't think those are the kind of roads you want to drive yourself, you can get into some serious trouble. There's a part of going to Zongu, we need to cross a river, right? On that river, at least you will see 2 broken bridges, because the ferocity of the water there is sometimes so high that the bridge sort of tumbles. Right? So currently, when there is the monsoon, the current bridge gets submerged, and there is just one bridge on which you can walk. It's like a suspension bridge. And people actually transfer, products and materials from one part of the bridge to the other by walking and lifting it themselves. Right? So that should give you an idea of how challenging being in that part is. Right? But of course, we went at a time when the river was completely dry, so we could drive through the river bed.
Okay.
Right? And we went up, we kept driving, and finally, I think after an hour of driving from that place, ended up reaching Zongu at a homestay, and the family was living around there. A different part of the house was for guests, and it was a very simple homestay. Literally, our room had a bed, a tube light, didn't even have a fan, because you didn't need one in Sikkim for most of the part of the year, and really that's about it. I mean, and we used to eat in the family's kitchen, right? And that is where I discovered some of the most amazing food I've eaten. And one big difference which I feel that, for a lot of us who are coming from, if I were to call it mainland India, we are used to such a heavy spice palate, right? And when you move to the mountains, that completely disappears, right? And yet the food is so flavorful. Like, I have eaten vegetables which I've not heard of, right? Like, one day they made us a vegetable made of nettles and grass, right? I had never eaten anything like that, but it was really, really tasty, and it was fresh, and of course highly nutritious. The other interesting which happened there was whenever you were having milk or tea, we felt that the milk was tasting a little different, right? And we initially thought maybe it's like, yak milk or something. And when we actually went around the house, we saw there was a cow tied up, and it was just cow milk, right? And I went and asked the ladies, like, why does it milk taste different? We thought it was yak milk. And she looks at me, is like, there are no yaks in this part of Sikkim. And I was like, yeah, of course, this is not high enough for yaks to be there. I was like such an idiot of assuming that, it's the mountains, so there must be a yak. So, right. But I also realized that because everything is organic, right, the milk tasted different to me, because that was my problem fundamentally. I'm used to a certain kind of milk which comes from where we live. Right, whereas the milk there was completely pure and fresh, because even the feed which the cow gets is all natural. Right. So that was also a revelation for me that what we are used to is so different.
Yeah. So organic is not just like a label that you just pay through your nose, right? It's actually the real deal over there.
Yeah, and I've also liked that while the Sikkimis are smart enough to use it to encourage tourism. They're not using it in a superficial way, as you rightly said, right? It's not just a label. I mean, they do believe in it. They do believe that their relationship with the earth and with the elements is very important. And, that's why if you think of, even you and any of your listeners would have been to the high mountain passes, you would have seen those Tibetan prayer flags, right? Because, and if you look at all of them, and each color of the flag, you typically see that, they're in green, red, yellow, white.
Yep.
And these colors, right? So each of them actually symbolizes an element. So blue symbolizes sky and space, white symbolizes air and wind, red is fire, green is water, and yellow is earth. So that is very inbuilt into a lot of culture in people in Sikkim. And Sikkim doesn't always mean Buddhism. By the way, there are a lot of Sikkimese people who are not Buddhists, right? They follow their own gods, and a lot of people follow both. So while they'll follow their own gods, they will also follow Buddhism. That's why the connection to elements is so strong. And I think there's one big misconception I've sort of wanted to clear. A lot of people say that, they tie the prayer flags because it's supposed to send prayers to gods, so that whatever journeys they undertake are easy and they don't have problems. Actually not true. The flags are actually prayers for everyone. The reason you sort of tie it up at high altitudes is that the prayers written on those flags, which correspond to each of the elements, actually goes out to the entire world. And they believe that once that prayer is out, it's a part of the universe. And as in when the air passes, a part of the prayer goes away, which is why the prayer flags over time and elements get lighter. Which is why every Tibetan New Year, you would see that, there are new prayer flags which keep coming up. And over time, you will see a whole bunch of prayer flags at all these monasteries and stupas around the high mountain passes. And even when the day we were leaving, our homestay owner, his name was Jikmi, and he was the one who was actually putting up a new prayer flag at his own place. I was sort of seeing them put it together. And while, of course, it was an activity which needed to be done, but there was a certain amount of grace in the way they did it, a certain amount of respect to this entire process of putting up a prayer flag, which was really, really nice to, see and feel with them.
Yeah, absolutely. And also gives a completely different vibe to the place also, right? Just the kind of the sounds the fluttering sounds that it produces, it kind of creates a different vibe, and there is that positive energy, like you said. And apparently, like even travelers of the past, right? These are difficult places, these are difficult terrains, right? To even navigate, right? So even in the past, like that was the idea that these send out like good vibes and good energies so that travelers can travel around safely. So that was one aspect of it as well. Really, really great. And I think that's, again, byproduct of kind of taking it slow, taking extra time to absorb these things, right? Otherwise, you're just looking at them, they look beautiful, and you pass on, right? Here, when you're traveling slow, when you're getting a chance to actually speak with people, try and understand the local folklore, the local legends and stuff like that, that's, I think, the aspect of slow travel that is not so evident, right? That those are the things that you get to gain out of slow travel. It's not just rushing and passing through these places, but kind of absorbing and getting know both of the good things, good parts of lives of the locals here, as well as the difficulties they face, right? That way it gives you that practical view of life in the mountains and life in these sometimes difficult places also, right? That is great. And just going back to some of the food that you mentioned also, right? Now living in a homestay like this, living with locals like this, and especially places that are less accessible compared to even, say, your Lachen or your Gurdung Mar that has that tourist inflow, right? How was that whole experience? Because I know we did mention about the organic part of it, but yeah, for us, a lot of us tourists, if I may call, mountain food is usually not much more beyond Maggie, right? That's what we. But how was your experience? You kind of touched upon it a little bit, but anything more to add to that?
Yeah, so the good part about our trip was that I'm a non-vegetarian, while my wife is a vegetarian, right? So we got a best of both worlds in terms of food. And one thing which I've always maintained traveling anywhere in the world is that if you eat eggs, your life is really sorted. Right. I mean, eggs is one thing you can get really pretty much anywhere in the world. And so was the case with Sikkim. What we also found was that we ended up eating a lot of vegetables which tasted very different. And they were the very regular vegetables we had. In terms of meat, I'd say chicken is not something you'd find in Sikkim, because Sikkim, as I said, is still organic, right? So they've not really given into mass factory farming of chickens the way we have in cities. So you would still get a lot of pork, and for some you might still get, sometimes you might get lamb or mutton, that's, goats. But chicken is difficult to find. So what they would typically do is that they would go to the nearest city. So for example, in the case of Zongu, they could have gone to Mangan to pick up chicken for us, but we were not really keen on that because we were like, we'll much rather have what you have it here. The other thing which I've always loved going to the mountains and eating is the potatoes, right? The quality of the potatoes in the mountains is very, very good. And it makes for a really delicious cooking. So if you look at actually the food, with the way food practices are in India, you would realize that a lot of Northeast food is largely boiled or braised, right? Or stir-fried at best, right? You would not really see a lot of frying. Frying is more towards northern, western, and even southern parts of India to a very large extent. Now, there are multiple reasons for it. One is that when you are frying, you typically need to also use spices in conjunction. Now, because there are not that many spices which grow in most parts of the Northeast, their food also is sort of adapted to that. The second thing also is that the access to oil seeds has also been limited in these parts of the world. So that has also influenced the cuisine in itself. So I have never had a meal in Sikkim after which I felt heavy. Typically when you eat rich food, you get heavy. Like, when you overstuffed yourself with the biryani, right, which I am sure, Chef, you're going to do today or tomorrow, very soon.
But dreaming about it tonight.
Yeah. So, when you stuff yourself, you do feel heavy. You feel like, I can't move any further. That's never happened with any of the food, and not just Sikkim. That's true for my time in Meghalaya and even up north in Himachal as well.
Yep.
Is that you don't feel heavy because they are not meant to be like that, right? So it's a lot of soupy stuff, right? Because the more water you drink, it sends more oxygen into your body. So I also sort of understood a lot of science which goes behind the foods in the Northeast, and why it makes so much sense, and why adapting certain practices from the cities is not really going to be beneficial for them, because they do so much amount of walking and water is not always available. So drinking all that soupy food also keeps you hydrated. Whereas if you actually eat fried food, it makes you that much more thirsty, right? So a lot of those things also started to notice once I had the time to sit and talk to my homestay owners, talk to the lady who was running the kitchen. And one thing which I'm always amazed by women in the mountains is their ability to carry loads on their backs. Sure. Right? I have no idea how they do it. And I've seen women who are like in their 60s and 70s do it with such ease. I feel ashamed, honestly, at looking at myself as I can't do this, what she's doing right now. So, you also sort of understand that how important it is to be, physically fit and active in these parts of the world, because you don't have help and you don't have machines to really do most of our work. So a lot of those aspects of their lives really came to the fore when I was able to spend the couple of days in Zongu or 2 to 3 days in Lachen.
Absolutely. And also one other thing that I looked up, apparently Zongu is kind of I wouldn't say the base, but a lot of these Lepchas, right? They are the original inhabitants, right? One of the early inhabitants of Sikkim and the region around. So a lot of them are actually based out of Zongu. So that way, I guess a lot of the stuff that you tried out was also kind of like Lepcha special that you tried out, right?
And this is exactly what I was saying, that they practice their own traditions, the Lepcha traditions, but they also practice Buddhist traditions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and before we move on from food, how can we kind of not touch upon the local brews of Sikkim? Did you have a chance to?
So in fact, I didn't end up having it while I was in the rest of Sikkim, but what happened towards the end was that our tour operator invited us home, for dinner with his family. Right now, honestly, I was a little surprised because a lot of times, a lot of these tours you book, and this was completely customized for us, by the way, so it's not like a mass market tour which we picked up. Is a fairly transactional process, right? You pay your advance and everything goes well. You pay the next part and you tip your driver and you're pretty much on your way, right? And it was not one of those polite invitations you get when you just for formality's sake. It was a genuine invitation. Like, he ensured that we came, and that is actually when we went to his place, and it was with his entire family. So his wife, his kids, his parents, and that is when actually we had tasted millet beer. Right, and it was homemade, right? So basically, you soak millets for 24 hours, and it starts fermenting, and it reaches a certain point, and you sort of you have those large wooden containers, and which have straws you drink it from. So what you just need to do is that, because the millet is fermented itself, you just keep adding water to it, right? And it's supposed to be, had over a longer period of time. Now, that itself as a food practice tells you that, people in the mountains have a lot of time and like to spend their time with people with their loved ones, right? So this entire food practice of having, millet beer over 1 hour, even before you start eating your food, tells you that space that, that opens up space for conversation. It opens up space to exchange experiences, exchange things which have been going on in your lives, and so on. And that was a meal which I also, I think, remember the most, simply because the hospitality was heartfelt, right? I mean, it was not because I was a client, to put it in the most obvious terms, right? Because he didn't need to do it, right? And it's not that I am coming to Sikkim every other year or every other month, right? I mean, last time I went to Sikkim was about almost 8 years ago. It was done out of a goodness of heart, right? And I think that's how I would define Sikkim as a place, that there's so much goodness in people, and that showed up in the foods and the drinks itself, right? So the millet beer was fantastic. And I don't care much for alcohol generally, right? So it was not that I was really dying to try out any of the alcohol there, but it was really, really tasty, and it gave you a very slight buzz, which, after a long, tiring day, always makes you feel good. And then the food itself was, a mix. So they were very considerate of understanding that, my partner is not vegetarian. Is not non-vegetarian, so she only eats vegetarian food. So they made sure there's food for her. They made sure there was some pork which was cooked for me, and all those things were checked with us before anything was cooked, right? And so while they did take liberties for us with taking us through Sikkimese cuisine, which I'm so thankful for, at the same time they also wanted to make sure that in case some of that food doesn't go down well with us, there is a backup for us to eat something. And of course, there was way more food than we could have possibly eaten, and that goes without saying. And that was also a great memory, because how often do you get invited to someone's house, and someone who's lived in that place and who belongs to that place, and actually get to understand the local culture, the food habits, how people live, what are the challenges of living in those places, and so on. So that was a memorable meal for me. Yeah, alcohol was definitely a part of that.
Absolutely. And I think just also goes back to that point, right, about the people of the mountains in general, and of Sikkim also in particular, that really, really kind-hearted, soft-spoken, and very genuine people, right?
Yes.
It's I guess, I mean, ideally most people are like that. It's just that we city dwellers, I guess, we
become too cynical, Seth,
exactly. There is that trust deficit, right? You're always doubting, you're always thinking about, is he try to pull a fast one on me and stuff like that. But here you kind of get that genuineness, right? And a lot of these things, like you said, with your tour operator, you would have expected something just to be transactional and hi, bye, and move on. Not the case at all. And that's why I would again try to call out that point that recently it was made popular, I guess, be local and vocal about it, or whatever, right, on those lines. But I would genuinely say that not just a tagline, but trying to don't hold back on spending, right? Pay them what it's worth. Leave the haggling to the cities in your day-to-day life. But at least in places like these, especially genuine people like these, leave the haggling for another day in the city. But great people, and like I was touching upon them, right? Lepchas, right? One of the original inhabitants, and similarly the Bhutias and the Nepalis, right? They form like the major kind of people and the locals there. And I was also surprised by the fact that Sikkim, being the second smallest state in India, they have 11 official languages, right? So almost that much diversity for that small of a place. That also almost feels like a little micro ecosystem out there, right? It's literally a microcosm of the rich cultural and culture and heritage, right? In terms of diversity, how diverse it is. That would have been a great experience also. I mean, obviously, given that it was a slow travel, you might have not interacted with all of these tribes, but it blew my mind that such a small place that we consider a small state, it has culturally so many different kinds of people and so many different languages too. And now, having spent some time here, how long of an itinerary did you say this whole trip was?
This entire thing was about 7 to 10 days for us. I mean, because some part of it is also getting from because I was before that I was attending a friend's wedding, so trying in Siliguri, so trying to club that with the trip, and a whole lot of things like that were happening. So I think about 7 to 8 days is what we really spent, and we really just spent time in Zongu and Lachin. Right, Gangtok was more of like a stopover place to sort of rest yourself and move ahead. Going to Lachung and Yumthang Valley, I mean, that could also a great trip to take, and then sort of from there go to 0 Point. So, but yeah, maybe another time. No, not this time. So
you have to go back another time anyway.
Correct, right. Of course, I still have to make it to Gurudambar. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, just to repeat it, right? I spoke about the diversity of the kind of people you find, but even in terms of places to just go around in Sikkim, right? Right from the mountains to these beautiful high altitude lakes to you have these valleys filled with rhododendrons and stuff, and you have the monasteries, people, whatnot. Like it's a small state, but like small but mighty, like they say, right? That's how it is. And Utsav, thank you so much for coming and spending some time with us. And it's just opening us up to, like, literally, I felt like I was looking through a kaleidoscope. And love to have you again sometime. And all the best with Postcards from Nowhere as well. Look forward to it.
Thank you so much, Seth. It's been a pleasure, and I had fun chatting with you. And I think one thing which I'll wish for you as well as all of our listeners here is that we hope to travel again soon when things normalize. It's a wish I have for everyone. And I hope it comes true soon.
Thank you so much, Utsav. Love chatting to you. That was yet another great episode of the Musafir Stories. If you guys like the show, please subscribe to us on iTunes or Apple Podcasts, Savan, Pocket Casts, Castbox, Stitcher, or any other podcasting app available on iOS or Android. Please do leave us a review on iTunes. It goes a long way in the show's discoverability. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. We go by the handle The Musafir Stories. Or, if it suits you, you could email us at themusafirstories@gmail.com or visit our website at www.themusafirstories.com for more information. All of these links will be made available in the show notes section of each episode. So here's to more traveling, sharing, and inspiring. Stay tuned for our next episode. Until then, happy travels and goodbye.